Good day, everybody. This is Justin from the RC and Coffee YouTube channel and Facebook page. As always, if you haven't had a chance to do so, please consider supporting us by subscribing to the YouTube channel and, of course, signing up to the multiple Facebook pages. So today we have an interesting comparison. We have the brand new ARRMA VORTEX that I believe was just released on Friday in Canada. And we have the legendary Losi Tenacity DB Pro that has been around for a little while, but is basically Losi's workhorse on the 1/10th sphere. So those two products are very, very important for each brand, simply because they tend to represent the bread and butter of what those companies sell. They also tend to be, the first impressions that a new hobbyist will have on a particular brand, and because of that, they are particularly important to each brand. I do not believe that at the time of producing this video, such comparison has been done. This will not be a driving comparison. This will be a purely technical one, and of course, a driving footage will follow at a later time. So we're gonna dive into what makes these cars special, the differences in terms of architecture, technically speaking, the value, of course, which is a theme that I, as you know, if you follow the channel, that I love to talk about. And without further ado, this guy here is $4.99 Canadian dollars, and this guy there is $5.89. There's a $90 difference already, so about $70 US, give or take, I believe. It'll be interesting to see if that's something that can be seen, can be perceived just by looking at the cars themselves. And this is literally the first time that I just got them out of the box. I'm discovering both vehicles with you along as I'm speaking, so it'll be quite interesting. So first impressions, I guess we can start with the Vortex. When I took it out of the box, I was pretty shocked by the weight. It's a very, it's a pretty heavy vehicle relative to the weight, much more than what I remember my Rustler to be. By the way, there's going to be a video with the Rustler at some point coming up, and a comparison, of course. So it is substantial, and it feels particularly stiff. Actually, it's a chassis that is, you can tell it's a new construction. You can tell it's the new way of doing things. Apologize if you're snoring in the background, by the way. That's the pug. There you go. That's what they do. So it feels very stiff, which gives me an initial impression, obviously, of quality. Those impressions tend to go hand by hand. I do like the fact that I'm seeing the protections on top here, the kind of roof skid plates, you can put it this way, and it looks like the material that they've used for the rear wing is a bit different from what I've seen on previous ARRMA vehicles. It's a satin finish. It does look like it'll scratch easily, but it's flexible enough that I think it's going to hold up to abuse, essentially, because that's what those vehicles are for. Now you've got the ARRMA, the ARRMA system, where your little pin here is attached with rubber. I guess you call that a rubber attachment point. I'm not sure if there's a terminology for this. And I really like the fact that it comes out of the box with a really, it looks super sturdy. The wheelie bar there, so it's not. It's very different from what I've seen on Traxxas. I'm thinking about the Rustler here. You basically have, it's a big piece, looks really sturdy, and it's directly integrated into the rear bumper. So that is a nice touch. And on top of that, the wheels are padded with, are rubberized. So I mean, the attention to details here is quite surprising, and I haven't even taken the body off. What else? So sturdy yet flexible bumpers, that's a necessity. You want that to be able to cushion some of the shocks that this will will take, some of the abuse. And let's see underneath, plastic chassis, kind of reminiscent of what you'd see on granite. Even, I mean, obviously a wrestler as well, although Traxxas has the honeycomb design underneath that I believe is proprietary. In terms of the wheels, they're pretty firm. They're vented, they're pretty firm. I really like the design. Actually, I really like the design of the vehicle in general. I think it looks really, really nice personally, but that's kind of irrelevant because to each his own, and for some, performance is more important. That's actually my opinion as well. But really, aesthetically speaking, I think it looks the part. And on top of that, I don't have the other versions here, of course. As a matter of fact, this is not my first Vortex. It's my second one. I had ordered a red one. They gave me a green one. Returned it this morning and got the red one. But they have a purple one. Long story to say that I think that this will be a really nice vehicle to get different demographics to enjoy RC. I'm actually thinking of girls. I really like the fact that they're coming up with these colors. The pink purple for ARRMA for the Vortex. I know that Traxxas has been doing the same as well. I think it's very appealing, and I really appreciate the fact that they're doing that. I don't know if that's the purpose behind it, but I've had really positive comments from girls and women about the aesthetics of some of these vehicles, and I think it's important if it's a consideration for this category of future hobbyists. Now, looking at the Losi DB Pro, there's actually a lot more going on. So you've got the scale interior, which of course you don't have on the Vortex. Right away, you're seeing the metal shocks there. The Vortexes are plastic. You've got your little bumper here, which, let's see. So the bumper is attached to, there's a plastic ring underneath. I'll show it later on once I open up the body. There's a plastic ring that basically acts as a shock. There's a bit of compression that can occur once the vehicle nosedives. In terms, this very much looks like a mini DBXLE for those of you who are familiar with this vehicle. Great car, by the way. It's one of my favorites, the DBXLE. See this? That's great. That's really good. The DBXLE had that as well. It's actually a little thicker. Obviously, the car's bigger. This will take some abuse for the size of it, and literally the wingspan. I think it'll be able to take a significant amount of hits. In the case of the Vortex, I don't think that it needs to be as flexible because it's directly connected to the body, and the body naturally flexes because it's made out of Lexan. So obviously you have Losi's high quality plastic throughout, and I have to say, up to the tail end, it feels just as sturdy as the Vortex, because unlike the Vortex, this guy has a metal chassis. So those 80 or 90 bucks of difference of delta between the two prices go a really long way with these two cars, and I'll show you. And I'm not saying that it means that it's better, but in terms of prestige of material, definitely this guy has a huge edge over the Vortex. But then again, I'm not saying it's making it any better, because as we know, plastic flexes, metal bends. They both have their advantages and inconvenience or disadvantages. Tires. It's interesting. These tires don't feel as so there's a kind of a slight plasticky feel to the Vortex's tires. Not at all with the Losi tires. They feel very, very good, very grippy. The compound is consistent. When I'm applying pressure on the sidewalls of the Vortex's tires, I feel almost like a plasticky feeling, and I know that's not it, but that's how it feels. And then they become significantly plusher in the center. That's not the case with these guys. They're very consistent. I like the fact that it is an aggressive thread, but the tire is not really, it's not very wide, so that allows the car to slide. I've seen this with the DBXLE. It's a really pleasant to drive around, and I'm saying this because I think that's what's going to be the difference between those two vehicles. I'll get to that in a second. But as I was saying, up until the rear of the car, the Tenacity DB Pro feels just as sturdy as the rigid as the Vortex. Obviously, the tail end is kind of breaks that theme slightly, but again, relatively speaking, for what it is and for being such a small piece, it is incredibly sturdy. I'm actually quite impressed. So I'm not mentioning this as being an issue. I'm just pointing out that overall this guy feels more rigid, this one slightly less, but it's just the tail end, not the vehicle as a whole. Also, the there you go, Tenacity DB Pro comes with lights. This guy doesn't. The first thing that I did once I put the vehicles on the the table, it was to try the suspensions a little bit, and there is a difference. So right off the bat, the setup, it's completely different. So the front of the Tenacity DB Pro is significantly firmer, I'd say, than the rear. It's not it doesn't have more bounce, it's just firmer. The rear is very, very plush, and it feels, so both hands can actually touch the ground if I were to slam the chassis to the ground. And it feels like it has a little bit more travel than the Vortex, although I'm not sure if that's in reality that's the case, because the suspensions are set up completely differently. So, and if we take a look at the Vortex, it's a lot more balanced. The front and the rear, I can tell the front is interesting, actually. My bad, it's the opposite. It feels like the front is slightly softer than the rear. So you've got basically the opposite setup. So firmer at the front for the Losi, way softer at the rear. Slightly firmer, slightly softer at the front, firmer at the rear. This kind of makes sense because it has a wheelie bar, and you probably want a bit more control with firmer suspensions so that you can really apply the power and have a bit more stability in the rear as the car, wheelies. So that's quite interesting. And I believe that's going to be the defining factor between a buyer for this vehicle versus that one. So let's have a quick look inside. So as we know, ARRMA has their, I'm going to use a pen, it's usually easier. Here we go. So they have their proprietary system, which I love. You can't really lose a pin. Have a bag full of pins just in case. Right. So that's the body. Obviously, don't just blast, of course. And you've got little protections underneath here. Same here. Those are the attachment points. Sorry, of the wing. And the Losi. Interesting. The Losi is a lot easier to. The pins are a lot easier to remove. I believe that's it. And then, voila. There you go. So, let's take a look. The Vortex. Actually, I'll do it the others. There you go. The Vortex. And hopefully that's going to hold. The Losi. And it doesn't hold anymore. All right, we'll do one after the other. So, let's start with the Vortex. The Vortex, you have a chassis with a protection there at the front. You've got this little dirt protection. There you go. And then you have your ESC and your motor on the left hand side when you're facing the vehicle, balancing out the weight of the battery, which will be on the right hand side. This is a 100 amp ARRMA ESC. The motor is a 3660. What's the kV again? Let me remember real quick. I believe the kV for that. Let's see. Sorry guys, I'll give you the right information. Was it 3200? Let's see. 3200 kV, that's correct. So 3200 kV, a 3660 can. So a bit of a smaller can here than there. And here you have a ARRMA with 130 amps, and your can is a 550. The motor is a 3150, so a little torquer, a little bit bigger of a motor. ARRMA learned from their BXL systems, which have the tendency to overheat. They put a fan right on there, so that's really good. I really like this approach. And you can see the big bore plastic shocks. They're oil filled, throughout. So I'm not seeing the plastic as being an issue here, but it has to be noted. Those are metal, those are plastic. And what's interesting is the shock towers. It's a really big piece of plastic. It's a different type of material. It seems it just feels different. I'm not exactly able to describe how, but they've used a gray plastic for the parts that require reinforcement. So you do have something that's very reminiscent of the honeycomb design that you see in Traxxas. I don't know if you guys can see right here for anything that requires rigidity, the differential cartridges, the shock towers, anything that needs to be sturdy has been made out of that really thick and sturdy plastic. And what's nice is that typically ARRMA has the shock socks. Here they don't, but they do have a little protection here for whatever's coming up front. So I'm not sure how useful that would be. They have it at the front and they have it at the rear as well. And this is what I was telling you about, the little oval thing here. That'll kind of the crumple zone if you want. If you hit this head first, you have the same at the back here. So that's really wow. This thing will be extremely sturdy because by the time it hits the shock tower, you have the crumple zone in the middle. You also have the bumper at the front, and on top of that, you have the wheelie bar, which itself seems to be designed to absorb some of the weight. So that's really interesting. So in both cases, you've got the let's see if they have the same. No, they do not have the same servos. So the DB has a Spectrum servo with the receiver glued right next to it with double-sided tape here. And I actually prefer the Vortex's setup. It's properly, so there you go. So you've got your servo here. It has no name. I don't think it's oh my bad, it's a Spectrum. It's written on top. I just don't know if it's the same type. It seems a bit larger though. Let's see where. Interesting. And you basically have the ESC that sits underneath not the ESC, the receiver that sits underneath the ESC here in a box. You can tell with the antenna. All right, so now biggest difference between those two, it's actually not the electronics, although it is different. It's the fact that this one has the DB has a center differential, which is sitting here, whereas the Vortex has a plastic spool here. So it's extendable. It's It's interesting the way they've done it. So it's a shaft that basically moves, slides up and down. It's not a thick shaft like you would see on an X-Max, on an X-Max, for instance. It's literally a shaft that goes in and out like this. And the extremities are made out of metal. So basically what that means is that in the case of the DB, you have an ability to alter the way that the car reacts and handles that you will never have on the Vortex, simply by changing oil. So we did a video a few months ago about the difference between a car that has a spool and a car that doesn't. I believe we compared the Traxxas X01, which has a spool, which is spool driven, with the Felony, and I believe, what did I use? Anyways, I think the example I used was a ARRMA Felony. It must have been this or another car, a car that had a center differential. And I'll demonstrate with these two vehicles the difference between a spool and a center differential. I'll just hold this here. All right. If you hold the rear wheels with your elbows like this, and you try to turn the wheels, the front wheels of a car that has a center differential, they will turn like this, even though the rear is blocked. If you try to do the same with the Vortex that has a spool, you see my elbows, they're locking the rear wheels. You can't. There's no way. The reason for that is that the spool allocates a 50-50 split between the front and the rear differentials. That cannot be variable. It's always 50-50. The advantage of a differential is that you can alter this proportion, putting more than 50-50 at the rear or less. It's depending on how you like driving. Typically, cars with a spool or with a thicker, cars with a spool rather tend to have a more neutral handling, although they will like to wheelie a lot because you'll have that 50-50 power at the rear. But at the limit, so if you take a limitless, for instance, they will understeer. They'll be a lot more controllable simply because the front and the rear keep on fighting each other and therefore keeping the car straight in doing so. In the case of a car with a center differential, the car is a lot more nimble. You can make it oversteer a lot more. I don't know if you've ever seen an infraction driving next to a limitless. It handles completely differently. Although in theory you could actually set up this car so that it drives exactly like this one, but not vice versa. So that's what I tend to like with center differentials. It's the ability to change the behavior of the car. And to get back to the differences, the core differences between those two, the core differences relate to the use of the vehicle. This guy it's a basher. It's one that you're going to be jumping all day long, and it's one that you're going to be doing wheelies with all day long. And the fact that you can't alter the way that the vehicle behaves through the differentials is not an issue, or you can because you have a front and a rear differential, but you don't have a center one. But it's not an issue because at the end of the day, it's a car that needs to be able to land on its roof, on its head, on its rear, and not brake. And that also, in my opinion, probably explains the reason why the suspension setup is so different. You have a stiff rear because you're going to be banging that rear every time you're going to be busting wheelies, and you have a soft, a softer front so that you can actually, get the car to rotate. You want the car to rotate when it turns because let's remember it has a spool. Therefore, it's going to understeer more naturally. Having a softer front suspension and a firmer rear suspension mitigates partially the fact that the spool always gives it a 50-50 ratio. Here, you don't need to have this because, well, it's not going to be a wheelie machine at all. So you can have a softer suspension at the rear, which will apply a lot of the power. It's not going to, actually I've never seen one of these wheelie out. I'm sure with the right setup it can, but it's not meant for that. This is meant for sheer handling. And whereas this guy is meant to bash. It's the big difference between the two. Not that this guy doesn't handle. I've seen fantastic reviews about the handling of the Vortex, so I'm really excited to try the two of them. Oh, by the way, this guy, as you were talking about wheels a bit earlier, this guy has 14 millimeter hexes. This guy has 12, more standard, so you won't be able to switch tires rather between one car and another, but you have the ability to put aftermarket wheels on both. This guy has sway bars, front and rear, right here, and at the rear as well. And they're not this. Are they the same? Typically, the difference goes with the color. Yeah, they seem to be the same color. And let's see. No, the Vortex doesn't. They both have adjustable turnbuckles, which is nice. Here. And here. What else? The Losi DB has this center spine, if you want, that rigidifies the body altogether. It kind of sandwiches everything in between. So that's the center brace, and you've got front and rear braces as well that make sure that the torsion is kept at a minimum. It also acts as a pass-through for the wires, which is really, really nice. In the case of the Vortex, the wiring is done through the side. And I mean, there's a lot less space to work with, but again, everything's very easy to reach. I would guess that working on the Losi is probably a lot easier than the ARRMA, but I haven't tried, so it's hard to tell without doing so. But just looking at the layout, there's a lot more space here than there's in the Vortex. In terms of arms, it's interesting. Let's see. You can adjust the Tenacity's ride height by changing where the shock is, the attachment point of the shock. You have the ability to select 3 different settings, and the arm itself is about the same thickness of the arm of the Vortexes, although there's a lot more holes in it. I'm not sure if that impacts the solidity of the vehicle or not. Now here you can tell it's a one-size-fits-all. There's no ability to change the ride height, which is fine. I mean, it's already riding probably just a tad higher than the Losi. It's fine. The Rustler actually rides a lot lower, although again the Rustler has the ability to adjust the ride height. In terms of value, both vehicles come with speed pinions. So this guy right out of the box, I think it claims, did it claim 60? I believe it claims 60. The other one, sorry, with the speed pinion, 60 miles an hour. This guy claims 50. We'll have to test in real life, how this really, if it's real or not. I haven't driven any of those vehicles, so we'll get to see. Now, what's interesting is that I'll have to make sure that I remember which one's which. They come with, actually no, they come with different transmitters. Sorry, I was going to say they come with the same. That's not true. So this is the old DX2E. So I can tell right away that this goes with the Tenacity. It's a decent radio. I've personally never had any issues with it. Has good range, feels decent, but I definitely prefer the DX3 by far. Basically, the DX3, just ergonomically speaking, is a much better radio. It feels like the DX5C, as a matter of fact, or the Rugged. It really feels the handle is a lot thicker. You've got the wheel is padded. You've got way more adjustment here, and it's compatible. Well, both of them actually are compatible with Spectrum's array of electronics and telemetry and whatnot. You have for the Vortex this paper manual. It's a fairly small one, but quite a few pages. I scroll through it. It's fairly clear, although the fact that it's such a small manual makes it a bit tougher on the eye from time to time. Losi has its typical glass paper, plastic paper. I'm not sure how to call that. Manual feels a little more premium. It's a bit easier to see things, so I do prefer personally, but I mean it's not a big deal. And again, I do like the fact that both vehicles come with speed pinions. That's not the case for the Traxxas Rustler. So overall, I do think that they both represent fantastic value. I think the Rustler sells right now for $6. Let's see. It's kind of the black sheep here, but it'll be interesting. I mean, it's the OG here. It's been here for a long time. It's a tried and true product. So it goes for $629. Sorry, Canadian. So $130 more than the Vortex Canadian, and $50 more than the Losi. The Losi has a metal chassis, metal shocks. They both have bigger motors. I think they have more powerful ESCs. They're a lot heavier than the Rustler. So it'll be interesting. I know that from what I've seen, the Vortex is a bit quicker with right out of the box than the Rustler. It'll be interesting to see the comparison with this guy. Of course, with speed pinions, the sky's the limit, but also heat's the limit. So I'm personally not a huge fan of that. I think the cars have been designed for their original, the initial pinion that's in there, and the high-speed pinion, it turns it into a one-trick pony, and the second it hits grass, it tends to overheat, because let's remember that these guys they're belly draggers, relatively speaking. They're low, they're catching everything, and that has a tendency to get the motors to overheat. Now this guy does have a heat sink and a fan. This guy doesn't. At the same time, this is the chassis is a lot more open here. There's nothing. I mean, there's air coming in, so that probably does have an impact on the overall ability of this chassis to dissipate heat. So yeah, very, very different yet similar vehicles. I can't wait to try them. I think they're going to behave completely differently. So I always like to have two of the same. It's like a chocolate ice cream, vanilla ice cream. They're both good, but for different reasons. And once we'll throw the Rustler into the mix, it'll be quite interesting. Just giving a quick look at I'm really impressed by the size of the C hubs on or spindles on the Vortex. They look really sturdy. The shafts are made out of plastic, but the C hubs, it's a bit tough to show here, are huge. So I'm thinking those will, they'll be reliable. The rod ends are super thick. I was watching a comparison between